these things start very early. Both this I am not a writer message or I'm not creative message and the I'm going to become old and being old means all these negative things. All that stuff can creep up on us when we are too young to have good ways to push back. When we're too young to think critically about that messaging. And it's really too bad, but it's also the case that when we reach a certain age and we stop caring so much about what others think of us, we can also stop caring about the negative messaging that we've internalized. We can really start to push back on it.
Hello, you are listening to the Late Bloomer Living podcast. I'm Yvonne Marchese, your host, and I'm so happy you're here. I created this podcast to give you inspiration and let you know you're not alone in feeling stuck in midlife. I also invite you to join the Age Agitators Club for women, where we come together monthly to hatch our plans for making waves as we age. Being part of this community for women will remind you on a regular basis that you're not too old, and it's never too late to do that thing you've been thinking about. You can find more information at latebloomerliving.com/community, and I hope to see you there. Hello, my friend. Ooh, we're going to get spicy today. I'm so excited. I have Stella Fosse with me, who is an author of a certain age, who writes sexy stories as a creative antidote to the gendered ageism that women face in society. Easy for me to say. So Stella is somebody who I have been admiring from afar on LinkedIn, and we finally connected. She started writing erotica featuring older women characters after a whole career in writing for biotech. Yeah, you heard that right. So she started writing short stories in her early 60s and then published her first novel at 68. So I'm telling you, it is never too late. And I love that what she's doing has this mission of creating visibility for older women. Older women are just not featured in stories. We are going to get into all that and why she is so passionate about writing romance for older women. She's written several novels. The story collection that she wrote was The Erotic Pandemic Ball. How fun is that? Her second novel was titled Vampires of a Certain Age. I love it. I love it. Stella, thank you so much for being with me today. I can't wait to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have a new book out.
I do.
Yeah.
I have a new book out that encourages women of a certain age to write their own sexy stories. It's called Write and Sell a Seasoned Romance. And it's a guide to everything from choosing a premise all the way to selling your book.
Thank you so much for sending me a copy of that, which I've just started reading. And I have to tell you, I love the intro to it. You brought up fairy tales in the beginning and how women are written in fairy tales, older women. You brought up the Gina Davis Institute, which I really want to talk about. I have a friend who was a producer on a film called This Changes Everything, which was executive produced by Gina Davis, talking about how underrepresented female characters in general are on screen. So this is a real visibility issue. And when women are on screen, it is very often as a love interest. They aren't the main, they're a side love interest, let's just say, not a featured main character love interest. And then when women turn 50, whew, they just disappear from view.
It's true. It's true. I love the title of one of the reports from the Gina Davis Institute is Frail, Frumpy, and Forgotten. It's a report all about how women are portrayed, how older women are portrayed in media, and how disconnected that is from our vivid real lives.
Yeah. I feel like it's starting to change. Do
Mhm.
you have that? Does that feel right to you? Or do you, I mean, I think there's still a long way to go, but I do
A
feel like
long
it's
way to go.
beginning to change.
Yeah. Yeah, both those things are true. I mean, if you think about Hacks winning at the Emmys, if you
Yeah.
think about Grace and Frankie, if you think
Such a fun
about,
show. Such a fun
yes,
show. Yeah.
yes.
I've
And
gotten to the point too where I'm starting to, if I know something features a strong older woman character as the main character in a show, I make a real effort to make sure I watch it so that
mhm.
I can be one of the numbers that they can, so that the numbers people can look at these things and go, oh, people are interested,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Absolutely. And the same thing is happening with fiction. One of my favorite books is called The Book of Old Women by a retired literature professor named Ruth Saxton. And she writes about the history of how older women are portrayed in fiction over time and how that's changed, but not quite enough. The she talks about the grandmother in Little Red Riding Hood and how the grandmother is sort of almost a prop in the story, and
Mm-hmm.
how we've come to the point where we're really starting to see women, older women, centered as main characters, but how slow that has been. And I think part of it is because the publishing industry for many years really pushed back on those kinds of books and was reluctant to publish books by older people, especially older women. So all that is changing slowly but surely.
Yeah. What, so I want to go back a little bit into your life. You were in the biotech industry, and then
Mhm.
in your 60s, you start writing erotica. Can you talk about that transition and how that even happened?
Sure. So when I was starting to think about retirement, I I really wanted to write whatever I felt like because I've been writing submissions to the Food and Drug Administration for decades, and then later in my career I was managing teams of people who were writing those submissions. My longest submission was 32 volumes. It was my height stacked up, 5'6".
Wow.
So I wanted to write whatever I wanted to write. So just before I retired, I read an article in the New York Times book review section by a romance author in her 50s, advising her sister writers of that age that if they wanted to get published, they'd better create characters in their 20s. And I
Hmm.
thought, am I going to be closeted like that? Because I am really starting this new career at this age. And I really wasn't willing for that to happen. Um, and it kind of ticked me off, really, to think that maybe
It
I'd missed the
it
boat
ticks me
because,
off too. That's my visceral reaction to that. I'm like, what the heck, man?
yeah,
Yeah.
because for so many of us who have kids and big careers, we get to this point where suddenly we have a bunch of freedom that we didn't have earlier in life. And of course, we want to explore creative options. So to hear that that was perhaps going to be foreclosed didn't sit well with me at all. So meanwhile, a friend of mine, Lynx Cannon, who's an erotic writer who's my age, decided to start a reading series at a local bookstore. It was a sort of bookstore cafe in Oakland, California, where I was living back then. And she called it the Dirty Old Women Writing Series. She invited her friends to write erotic stories and come and read them to a live audience,
Oh my gosh,
which
how fun.
sounded really scary and really
Yeah.
fun at the same time. So the place was packed. Every month when we did this, the place was packed. And there was a real range of ages, which I did not expect. One of the interesting things that happened was women in their 30s would come up to us after we read and say, thank you. We keep hearing that women's sexual and romantic lives end at 40. How great that you folks are doing this. And that really is the message that women get in our
I
society.
just got the tingles up my back, Stella, because I think about how I wish that when I was in my 30s, I wish that I had had somebody in my life or some media or something talking about the the fact that it doesn't have to all be downhill after 40 or 50.
Mm,
And I was so afraid of getting older. So when I hit my 40s, I was telling myself I was getting old. I was seeing changes in my body, and it was evidence to me that the downhill slide was starting. And part of that was I felt unemployable at 40. I
mm,
felt like there wasn't going to be any sort of real career growth for me at that point for a number of reasons that have nothing to do with age, but also to do with age, you know? And
mhm.
I love that that series reached younger people, that, that event was reaching people. And I hope that the work that I'm doing and that you're doing does continue to reach younger women.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, this is important for us at the age that we are, and it's also important to model this for women coming up.
Did
Those,
you also have those sorts of feelings as you like hit into approaching midlife? Did you struggle at all with looking at yourself in the mirror or what was happening or your vision of what you were going to be capable of going forward in life?
well, I'm a nerd, so I
Me
never
too.
really
I'm with you.
what I look like in the mirror is sort of interesting, but not that important to me. I'm much more, if I were going to be afraid of something, I'd be afraid of dementia
Yeah.
because I'm much more invested in my intellect than I am in my appearance. Um, and it's very interesting to, this is a whole other conversation, but it's very interesting, for example, reading Ashton Applewhite's book, This Chair Rocks. She talks about that the percentage of people with dementia is declining. And we very seldom get that information. But
Yeah.
I come out of biopharma and I have strong opinions about that whole industry. So
Hmm.
that's a whole different conversation.
It is a whole different conversation,
Yeah.
but I share that fear. I mean, my dad suffered from dementia, and you
Mhm.
watch that, and
Yeah.
this is one of the things. Have you read Becca Levy's book?
Yes. I
Oh my
love
gosh,
that.
I love that book, and it took me
Yeah.
forever to read it. I don't know why. I kept hearing about it, and I kept hearing quotes from it, and thinking, oh, I should read that book. I should read that book. When I finally did read it, it was I felt like little explosions were going off in my body because
Yeah.
it was the scientific, I mean, her studies that she did were were suddenly the proof of what I had experienced for myself just as an experiential thing. And I was like, oh, yeah, all the thoughts that I ever had about getting old and all the fears I ever had about getting old and all the ageism that was in my head, suddenly when I was 40, it all started to come together as this self-referential thing that was
Mhm.
holding me back.
It's such a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
That's the trouble. I read that book at the same time that I was completing a survey as part of a very large clinical study that's being run out of a California medical center. And the study asks an hour-long series of questions that are each focused on decline. So it'll ask you, are you having more trouble remembering names than you did 6 months? And how much more trouble are you having than you did 6 months ago at remembering names? So imagine those kinds of negatively structured questions over and over
Right.
again for an hour. By the time you finish answering them, you're starting to question your own cognitive abilities. Then 6 months later, I got the
It's
follow-up.
priming, really, right? It's negative priming.
It is. It
Yeah.
actually is. And the follow-up study 6 months later included a whole list of medications for dementia and asked if you were taking each one of them. When I looked into the funding for this study, it turns out that there's funding coming from some of the companies that make these drugs that's going through a nonprofit and into funding the study. So in other words,
Suspicious.
it makes you wonder if the whole thing is a marketing effort.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I wrote a blog about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have pretty significant reservations about the ways that medications are marketed in the United States. Again, a different topic, but an important
Different
one.
topic, but a whole very important. And maybe I do need to have an episode about that because it's a big problem. They, when they opened the option for the drug companies to start advertising directly to us, it changed a lot. It changed everything, and they're preying on your fears.
They really are, and the controls on those ads are questionable. So
For sure. Well, you would know for sure.
we could talk about we could talk about
Right.
this for a long time.
Well, let's go back to the event. The what was it called again? The dirty old
Oh,
lady.
the Dirty Old Women reading series.
Dirty Old Women reading series. Okay,
Yeah.
so you're there, and all of a sudden, these 30-year-olds are coming up and thanking you and thanking other people who are there. And then where did that take you from there?
The next thing we did was put together an anthology that my friend Lynx Cannon edited that's called the Dirty Old Women Anthology, a collection of stories that came out of that reading series. And meanwhile, I had the thought that we should start a writing group and get together once a month and have writing prompts and share stories and do some writing together and have snacks. So we did that. In fact, that group, which is called Eldoratica, is still meeting now online years later. So that was fun. And then I thought, how about if we put out a booklet that talked about how to start an Eldoratica writing group? And around that time, I went to a retreat in Marin County organized by a different friend of mine. It was a writing and art retreat, big fun. And she still does these once a year. Everybody gets together, and what tends to happen is the writers do art and the artists write. And so there's this huge sense of freedom because nobody has expectations about what they're doing. So that's very fun. I happened to sit next to a woman I didn't know and mentioned to her that I had this idea for a book or a booklet about erotic writing for older women and how to start a group. And she said, I work at North Atlantic Books and we'd love to publish a book like that. So that's not something
Wow.
you hear stories about people getting an agent, writing a book proposal, shopping their books to multiple publishers. But my first book, Aphrodite's Pen, The Power of Writing Erotica After Midlife, was that easy. It shows you
That's
the power of
incredible.
networking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It shows how powerful women are together.
Yeah.
So that's how this all started. And then from there on, I went into writing during the pandemic. A friend of mine called me on the phone and said, this is after I moved to North Carolina. A friend of mine in a senior community here in North Carolina called me and complained that her community was so locked down that if she left and came back without a note from a doctor saying she'd left for a medical appointment, she wouldn't be let back into her home, even though she had spent lots of money to buy a unit there. And she wasn't that worried about being able to leave per se. And she wasn't that worried, it didn't seem to me, about COVID itself. What she said to me was, what is this going to do to my dating life? And this was a woman who was probably at that point, 78 or so. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take this as a challenge. I'm going to write stories about the erotic lives of women in a lockdown senior community. So my story collection has friendly vampires visiting, it has time travelers, it has people from other universes, all kinds of interesting ways of getting around being locked down.
Mhm.
And
I love it. I love it.
so that was fun. That was really fun to write. And then I wrote Brilliant Charming Bastard, which is about three women scientists who discover they're all dating the same lying dilettante who is also stealing their ideas for his invention. And they get some very smart revenge. So that was that book. That's the
Sounds
one
like
that published
fun
when I was
too.
68.
That sounds like fun. Oh
It
my
was,
gosh.
the thing about writing when you're writing whatever you feel like is that it's just so much fun.
I can only imagine like after a whole career of technical writing, how freeing this must be for you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's true.
Wow.
It's true. And that's one of the things I stress when I teach writing and in books that I write about writing is that especially the first draft is just play. You don't need to judge yourself. You don't need to edit as you're writing. Just have a good time. And so my new book has lots of prompts and ideas to help make that writing fun because it really can be.
That's so cool. So I guess what I'm wondering is what have you learned about yourself, or how do you feel your life is different now than before you started writing for fun?
Oh, my life is completely different than before I started writing for fun. Um, I enjoyed being in biotechnology. It was intellectually challenging. I got to know lots of other nerdy people, which was fun. But it's so, corporate life, I think for anybody, is so structured. And the expectations in the United States are so high. I mean, I would get emails at 3 in the morning, and there was an expectation that I would turn them around by 7 a.m. And there
That's
isn't
insane.
there isn't a lot of
Just
room.
saying, sorry, but that's insane.
Well, I think in general, Americans just work too hard.
Yes,
And yeah, so for any of us, I think, who have the privilege, because it's not everybody, obviously, who gets to be in their 60s, not everybody gets to retire. But for those of us who have that privilege, it really does mean that there is so much freedom. There's the freedom that comes with graduating from your career. There's a freedom that comes when your kids grow up and have lives of their own. And for women in particular, what a great part of life it is to be in your 60s and your 70s and have that level of freedom. And I just really enjoy it.
yeah.
Which
Now, do
which isn't
you,
to say I don't work hard, because I do. I mean,
that was where I was going to go next,
yeah.
because really now, I mean, you're publishing books, you post to LinkedIn a lot. And so when I think of a retired person, when you say you're retired, I don't see that as fitting for you. I feel like you've
No,
had a career transition is
yes.
really what happened when I look at it from the outside. But do you feel that way?
Um, Part of my sense of freedom is knowing I could stop.
Hmm.
I could stop this at any time. I'm doing it only because I want to. But you're right.
That's a beautiful thing. That
It
is
is
a,
a beautiful thing.
yeah,
But I do all the things that are laid out in my new book. I write, I edit, I publish, I market. And if you're doing if you have a couple of books in different stages of that process, that is a lot. It is a new career. And one of the challenges I have is because it no longer makes a difference to me whether it's Monday or Saturday, I tend not to take days off, which is ironic. But there it is, you know.
There's a quote I came across recently that said the opposite of play isn't work, it's depression.
Yeah.
And I think you've just spoken to that very clearly because the work you're doing feels like play to you. I'm
Mhm.
gonna guess.
Even
And
marketing. I used to think marketing,
really,
yeah, I used to really dislike marketing.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, you know, I talk in the new book, I talk about how marketing can feel, you know, when you're writing, it's like you're in this ivory tower. And when you're marketing, it can feel like you came down out of the ivory tower and you're now selling used cars, you know.
Yes.
It doesn't feel comfortable for a lot of folks, but yet there are ways to make marketing fun. And a lot of that has to do with marketing by forming connections with people.
Love
I
that.
mean, I mean, think about what the conversation you and I are having right now. Doesn't feel like work to me.
No, me neither. I mean, this is the fun part of podcasting. And when I'm in photographer mode, shooting a photo session, I mean, time flies. It is that thing of being in the zone,
Yeah,
and
flow. They
then
talk about flow.
right, flow.
Yeah,
And then there's all the other things that have to happen around it. Like I've got to send out booking proposals and contracts and that's the part I don't, you know.
yeah,
But and then marketing, I am, I spend a lot of time on Instagram trying to build visibility for the podcast and for my message, and it's uncomfortable, frankly. It
yeah,
is an uncomfortable, it's an uncomfortable thing, but I make myself
yeah,
do it, and I have to get myself out of my own way when I'm doing it and find ways to make it fun.
yeah, yeah.
And that
Yes,
helps a lot.
it really does. And, you know, similarly with editing, I used to think of editing as drudge work. You know, first you have a really fun time writing your first draft and it's all play. And then you get to the editing stage and that felt like total drudgery. So I had to invent ways to make that fun, just like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I laid those out in the new book too. It feels really important to make as much as possible playful. Now, not everything can be. Proofreading, I have yet to find a way to make proofreading amusing. I did just, you know,
I host a lot of rooms in Clubhouse, and we were talking yesterday about this whole idea of how do you take the work that feels like drudgery to you because it's just not something you're ever going to enjoy. How can you make that more tolerable, And we were talking about the idea of gamifying it by, putting a time limit on it. Okay, can I get through this in 20 minutes, or can I get this done in 15 minutes, or can I get this done? And looking at it as a game. And we were trying to come up with other ways besides throwing a false time limit on something for fun. I'm going to put it in quotes, right?
yeah,
And seeing what else can you do to make things a little more tolerable that things that just have to get done,
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
love that. I love that gamifying drudgery. That is, I am making a note of this. I love this concept.
Hey, we're going to take a quick break here so I can tell you about an awesome resource that I think you're going to love. Here's the thing. We are always works in progress. Do you find yourself wondering, what do I want to be when I grow up? If so, then I think you're going to want to subscribe to We're All Getting Older, which is a weekly newsletter written by Lou Blazer that's all about continuing to grow and get better in the second half of our lives. We're All Getting Older is a sponsor for this podcast, and I'll tell you, I get so much benefit from reading Blues newsletter every week, and I think you will too. She writes the newsletter for midlifers who believe in getting better as we get older and making the most of life's second half. So if you want to subscribe to that, it is on Substack, and you can easily find a link to subscribe at loublazer.com. That's LOUBLASER.com. And now back to our regularly scheduled programming. How much of being an author do you feel like is entrepreneurial, the way you're doing it?
Oh, increasingly, it feels entrepreneurial to me. And I think that ideally starts very early in the process. When I put out the first version of my new book for people to look at, there's a section in the writing part that talks about sort of marketing in advance, about how you build your author presence, how you start having a platform. And the comment I was getting back from people was, why is this in here? Why isn't this in the marketing section at the end of the book? But there really isn't any, in my mind at this point, there really isn't any distinction. It's not a cut and dried process where you wait till the end, because yes, but from the time you write your first sentence, you are an entrepreneur. Unless you're only writing for yourself and you're never going to show it to anybody, the fact that you're writing makes you an entrepreneur. So yeah, I'm very oriented that way at this point, but that was not true when I was first writing in this new career.
So that has been like a journey for you along the path of writing, is to think about it in a more entrepreneurial way right from the beginning.
Yeah.
So does that go into when you're thinking about the idea for a book? Is it starting there? You're thinking does it affect the choices that you make of the stories that you're going to end up telling?
To an extent, yeah, because right from the beginning, when I'm thinking about the premise for a story, I'm already thinking about the audience for that premise. So yes, it involves the whole process from beginning to end.
That's fascinating. I'm really glad I asked you that question. That is because I wasn't expecting that part of the answer. That's fascinating to think about, incorporating the idea of promotion and who you're writing for in that writing process. Really interesting. Yeah. So cool.
And I think if you talk to someone who was writing literary fiction, what some people would call serious fiction, they would not either admit that they were thinking that way, or maybe they're really, really not thinking that way.
Right.
But if you've written multiple books and you've looked at what of your books sold best, it becomes natural to think about that for books going forward. Who is it who's going to want to read this? And what are they going to want to see, whether it's fiction or nonfiction? What's going to be either entertaining or what will people learn from in what I'm writing?
Yeah. Well, that seems really natural to me and not at all icky in the way that you might think if you're looking at it from a hoity-toity, literature point of view. That's amazing. What would you recommend to somebody who might be listening right now, who's like never thought of themselves as a writer, but is feeling some kind of spark by this conversation to go, oh, well, that does sound kind of fun, but I don't even know where to start. I'm not a writer. What would you say to that person?
First, I'd say everybody's a writer. We've all been writers our whole lives, and we all have ideas. We all have things that strike us as funny or important. We all have imaginations. We can all bring that to bear in the written word and have a really good time doing it. I would say that to a person who doesn't think of themselves as a writer or is maybe afraid to claim that for themselves, to find some good writing prompts and just go with it, because writing prompts can kick our brains in directions we didn't expect and help us to find that playful place. The thought, I am not a writer, is really, for a lot of folks, comes from their inner critic.
Mm-hmm.
And if you find good prompts, if you find ways to play with words, you're engaging your inner cheerleader instead.
I love that. Yeah, I think about it, and as you're growing up and you're in class and you're being taught how to write, it comes with like instant criticism.
Mm-hmm.
And things are said to you about what you have done, what you've put on the page, and then as kids, we internalize that to mean, oh, I'm not good at this, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I don't think that's where most teachers are, I don't think that's where most teachers are trying to do it, but we make decisions about ourselves when we're young because we don't have context, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
And I love the idea of being playful about this and letting your inner cheerleader come out. That's good advice. Good advice.
And it's really, it's sort of similar to what we were talking about earlier about internalized ageism. These things start very early. Both this I am not a writer message or I'm not creative message, and the I'm going to become old, and being old means all these negative things. All that stuff can creep up on us when we are too young to have good ways to push back, when we're
Mm,
too young to think critically about that messaging. and and it's really too bad, but it's also the case that when we reach a certain age and we stop caring so much about what others think of us, we can also stop caring about the negative messaging that we've internalized. We can really start to push back on it. And that's one way that being creative is really helpful, because if you really want to push back on your own internalized ageism, to me, there's no better way to do that than to write a story that has vivid, interesting older characters and let those folks out to play.
love it. I love it. When you and I had a phone call before we did today, we had a get to know you call. You told me you had a mission.
Mm-hmm.
What's
Yeah.
your mission?
My mission is to help other women past midlife find their power through creativity. I think it's something we can all do. And regardless of where we find ourselves at this point in life, I mean, you can be a writer if you have a tablet and a pen. I've read about the poet Audre Lorde, who was an African American lesbian poet who didn't have a lot of money and she didn't have much time. She worked in a hospital and she would jot down poems on a tablet in between surgeries. And she wasn't a physician, she wasn't a nurse, she was a worker in a hospital, but yet this is what she was able to achieve enormous things. And it's just something we can all do.
Yeah. I mean, we went down the route of talking about being an author as being an entrepreneur, but I think what you're speaking to right now is writing for the sake of writing, writing for the sake of self-exploration, that it doesn't have to be for anybody else, that if that's, just to get started and get out of your own way, just write.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Can I
right.
tell you what you said, that I wrote down a quote from you
Yeah, and it's
that
probably
day that we
really,
were talking?
I bet it's totally different from what I just said.
It isn't. It
Oh,
isn't. But I wrote it down because I was so tickled by the way you said it.
okay.
You said your mission was that you are trying to change the world one sexy story at a time.
Oh, well, that's good. That's a good way of putting it. I like that. Changing the world one sexy story at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Bit by bit, step by step. That's how we do things, right?
that's right. That's right. And, I can write a certain number of these, but the reason it's important to me to publish books about writing is to, we should have an army of women. We should have an army of old women writing vibrant stories. That would really shift that ocean liner of culture. We each have our teaspoon, but if we're all pushing pushing that ocean liner in a different direction with our teaspoons, we can change the way we're headed.
Love that image. I'm going to get my teaspoon out. That's fantastic. Oh my gosh, Stella, I think that's a great place to end this. Thank you so much for joining me today, for sharing your story and your mission.
Thank you. This has been a fabulous conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you. Well, there you have it. Do you have your teaspoon out and ready to paddle? I love that image because it speaks to the power that each of us has, especially when we are working together. Hey, if you want more information about Stella Fosse's books or her blog, you can find her at stellafosse.com. And you'll also find writing prompts there. So if you're feeling like you might need a little writing inspiration, check it out. You can also find a link to Stella's website in the show notes for this episode. You can just go to latebloomerliving.com and look for episode 199 of the podcast. And ooh, speaking of which, next week is episode 200. What? I hope you will join me to celebrate. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a fantastic week. And remember, my friend, always be bloomin' and bloom like you mean it.